Hey guys, how's it going? It's Krista here, and just before we jump into today's card, I know that some of you really enjoyed the just creating to relaxing music. Moving forward from now, I'll be posting the full version of these videos with just music, no talking, over on Krista Lynn full version YouTube channel. I'll link that channel down below. I want to use a die cut as a stencil for one of my cards, and today I'll be using Simon Says Stamp Filigree Heart Wafer Die. Just from a scrap piece of paper, I'm going to die cut what I'm going to use as a stencil. It can be any kind of paper, it can already be inked on, it can be a little bit painted on, it doesn't matter because we're going to be getting this covered in perfect pearls anyway. I did find I had to run the die through my die cut machine a few times just because the filigree portion of this die was so intricate. If I didn't, some of the little shapes inside wouldn't cut out or they would tear a little bit. I'm using a seam ripper to poke out all the little filigree portions. You can also use a pin as well as a paper piercer if you have one. I want to make sure that the paper that I'm coloring on doesn't move, as well as the die cut stencil that I just created. So not only am I going to tape down the cardstock that I'm going to add the perfect pearl to, I'm taping down the stencil as well. To add pigment to my stencil, I have a variety of perfect pearls as well as a little bit of water. I chose to start with Forever Violet, and I'm keeping the coloring fairly simple today. In the past, I have put down a base color of Perfect Pearl and then gone over it with a thinner consistency, one that's not so opaque, with like a perfect gold or a perfect pearl or a confetti white. The creativity here is up to you. As I color in my stencil, I'm just making sure that I have the consistency that I want, in that I have enough perfect pearls to get the opacity that I want. I want it to be fairly opaque, so I'm making sure to add a lot of the mica powder to my water. And the great thing about perfect pearls is they have a built-in resin that's activated by water. So once the perfect pearl is activated and it dries, it won't move from your paper. Now that the filigreed portion of this die cut is completely pigmented, I just want to hit this with a heat tool just to set all that mica powder. I chose to start drying my heart with the stencil over top first, just in case there was a lot of water underneath that it wouldn't move too much, as opposed to if I had taken the stencil off and just blasted the pigment straight on. This way, the stencil contains it a little bit. I chose to then take my stencil off because I didn't want my stencil to dry and adhere to the Perfect Pearl powder. And as for the stencil itself, I'm going to store that with my die just so that I can use this stencil for future use, and I can use it as many times as I want as long as it doesn't get ripped or clogged with Perfect Pearl. Sometimes over time, the little smaller holes do get clogged and you can't push any more Perfect Pearl through. And to make a card front for my card, I'm starting with Lawn Fawn outside in stitched rectangle stackables die. This is the largest die and it's 5¼ inches by 4 inches. I'm going to tape that down to make sure it doesn't move because I want to die cut my filigree heart at the same time. Using a T ruler, I'm using the edge of the rectangle die as a guide just to make sure that the heart is straight. And to do that, I'm making sure that the top of the heart hits the same part of the T ruler as I move it up. And since it's sliding along the square die, I know that it's straight. To check that my heart is center, I'm using my T ruler and a pencil to mark where the widest part of the heart is, and then just verifying that it reaches the same point on the ruler on the other side. Cutting both the rectangle and the heart at the same time, I want to make sure that I really run this through more than once. I found that die cutting these two together, it took more to die cut the filigree heart cleanly than it did just die cutting the filigree heart on its own. And again, I'll just poke out the filigree openings with a seam ripper. Again, you can use a paper piercer if you have one. To adhere the stenciled portion to the card front, I'm just going to use some Tombow tape runner. Before I add any tape runner, I wanted to make sure that the stenciled cardstock wasn't wider than the front card front. As it turns out, my stenciled heart was just a little bit bigger, so I wanted to trim that down before adhering it to the card front. And to do that, I just used a paper trimmer. Around the border of my piece of cardstock, I'm using some Tombow tape runner. In between the stenciled filigree portion of the heart, I'm adding some liquid adhesive. This part is completely optional. I like it because I found without it, the cover kind of lifted away from the Perfect Pearl. I really like when my cover is adhered really closely to the Perfect Pearl pigment background. Before I press firmly to adhere the cover to the stenciled heart, I'm just going to make sure that all of the little images on the inside line up. The heart card front is a little bit smaller than an A2 card, and I want to bring that up to the 5.5 by 4¼ A2 card size. To do that, I am making a frame out of purple foil cardstock. The large rectangle was from Lawn Fawn Large Stitched Rectangle Stackables dies. The inside rectangle is from Lawn Fawn's Outside In Stitched Rectangle Stackables set. And as you can see, the top and bottom of my frame aren't exactly equal, but that's okay because we're lining up the card front with the outside rectangle and not the inside rectangle. And to adhere those together, I'll just place a little bit of liquid adhesive down around the frame. For the sentiment, I'm using Lawn Fawn Scripty XOXO, and I'll die cut that out of gold foil cardstock. To line up my sentiment, I'm using my glass mat as well as a T-ruler. To center my sentiment, I'm taking the bottom of the heart as the center of the card and lining up the center of the sentiment with the bottom of the heart. To make sure that my sentiment is straight, I'll use my T-ruler. And I'll use that to make sure that the middle of the sentiment, it is along the edge of the T-ruler, all the way across. As a double check to ensure that my sentiment is straight, I'll mark with a pencil on my T-ruler where the O ends from the edge of the card, and verify that the beginning of the X is the same distance from the edge of the left side of the card. And once I have the perfect placement, I'll take a really fine pencil and just make a couple marks around an X and an O. And tracing just those few parts of the sentiment after I add my liquid adhesive, all I have to do is line up the sentiment with those pencil marks. After the sentiment was adhered to the card front, I wasn't able to see the pencil marks that I had made to find alignment. Next, I'll adhere the card front to an A2 card base using liquid adhesive. For the inside, I chose Happy Valentine's Day from Lawn Fawn Happy 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 add-on clear stamp set. I really like using a stamping tool for sentiments as well as images. I like it because it allows me to re-stamp an image or a sentiment if I didn't get great coverage the first time. To prep the cardstock for embossing, I used a paintbrush that is dedicated for embossing, as well as a dryer sheet to eliminate any static. Today I'm using Versamark ink to ink up my stamp. And Recollections Detail Gold embossing powder. The last thing to do is just to set my sentiment with the heat tool. And there you have our finished card. If you're still watching, thank you so much for watching to the end. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.